And this is your brainstem. And here at the base of your brain is your primitive reptilian brain. Named so because even reptiles have this. So this is where that fight, flight, or freeze phenomenon occurs. Wrapped around that is your limbic system. Hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala. Roughly, memory, physiological, visceral regulation. And this one's important. The amygdala is emotional interpretation and emotional reactivity. So not just emotions, but the way we perceive something and the way we react to it. Wrapped around that is your frontal lobe. And here, your prefrontal cortex. And this is really important because our prefrontal cortex is the part that tells us how to plan and execute behavior to serve our best interests. So this part says you should probably eat green beans instead of ice cream. This part says don't punch someone in the face for talking about your mama. They don't even know your mama. That's a bad decision and has legal ramifications. Or it says like don't shoot tequila shots before you come present at Deloitte, right? So we need this. We really need this part. But what happens when we get emotionally triggered or we have an accumulation of small emotional triggers all day long that stack up because we're ignoring them? And what happens when this gets poked? Let's use an example of getting in a fight with your significant other, because they tend to know how to push our emotional buttons. It's so odd how that happens, but they do. So we are having a disagreement and they push this emotional hot button. And you've probably heard the term someone flip their lid. So what happens is it's as if this lid, your prefrontal cortex, flips. And when it does, it's like the neural connections that run between those two things are severed. So this part and this part aren't communicating anymore. And this is when we start to do things like say horrible things, cuss, act very much unlike ourselves. And you're out there thinking like, I don't do that. I don't know what she's talking about. But we do this, right? And then 30 minutes or more later, when the lid comes back on, then we're like, wow, what was I thinking? How awful. How could I have done that? Well, the problem is you weren't thinking. You were reacting from a primitive state. So accumulated stress can lead us to engage in these kinds of ways and really wreak havoc in our life, across the board, both in the workplace and in personal life. And if we don't have healthy care behaviors in our tool bag, what starts to happen is that we respond to this lid flipping action by trying to regulate our own brain with just about anything that's going to give us a neurotransmitter kick. So that ends up being things like drinking alcohol, shopping, gambling, pornography, the list goes on. All those things give us a kick. So they feel good in the moment, and that's why we do them. But the problem is there's negative ramifications from those. Now, sometimes it's because our life situation is complicated and there's a price to pay from what we've done. But sometimes it's simply because the neurotransmitters in our body are now out of balance because of what we've done by messing them up with alcohol, etc. So these are definitely not your solution of how you're going to manage stress effectively. Though at some point when we're pushed past our threshold of being able to tolerate stress, these are the ones we all fall back on. Something in this avenue, right? Okay. Now, I get that most of you in this room, probably all of you in this room, work in a high-stress environment, and it would be impossible to do your job without a tremendous amount of stress. And that's true, and I know that for a fact because we all have to have stress. It's impossible for us to avoid it. And in fact, we actually need stress. We need a moderate amount of stress for our brain to function optimally. So we don't want to just chuck stress out the window. What we want to do is we want to learn to recognize it, manage it, and moderate it so we can find our optimal stress zone. There's a space at which we're fully productive, but not overshooting and causing unproductivity and problems.